The engineer's autistic son never showed joy, until the bricklayer changed everything. No therapy, scientific method, or technical guidance had worked, but a simple, spontaneous gesture from a bricklayer made the boy smile for the first time. It was there, between concrete and empathy, that a language was born, one no manual ever taught. Richard Moore had always known how to solve problems. From a young age, numbers were his preferred language, the one that made sense in a world that was often chaotic and unpredictable. A civil engineering graduate from Northwestern University, he had built a solid career on the foundation of precise calculations, well-executed projects, and an impeccable reputation in the market. Every structure he raised, every bridge he designed, every building he coordinated, was proof that logic and reason could shape the world around him. But there was one problem that no formula could solve, an equation with no apparent answer. That haunted him every morning when he woke up and every night before he slept. Gabriel was 5 when he received the diagnosis. Severe autism, the doctors said. Richard still remembered the cold office, the white walls, the heavy silence that filled the room after the neurologist finished speaking. Julianne, his wife, held her purse tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on some invisible point ahead. Neither of them cried in that moment. The crying would come later, in intermittent waves in the following months, as reality slowly set in like a leak that corrodes the strongest structures. Gabriel didn't speak. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't respond when called. He would spend hours spinning a toy car, watching the wheels move with a concentration that bordered on hypnotic. When thwarted, he would throw himself on the floor and scream until he was hoarse. Julianne had tried everything: occupational therapy, speech therapy, sensory integration, special diets, imported supplements. The house had become an extension of the clinic. Every room held therapeutic materials, every routine was meticulously planned. But Gabriel remained distant, as if he inhabited a parallel planet where no one else could reach. Richard had thrown himself into his work. It was easier to solve problems of concrete and steel than to face the empty gaze of his own son. He left early, came home late. On weekends, he brought reports home. Julianne complained, but deep down she knew it was his way of surviving. She had her own strategies. She recorded everything in spreadsheets, researched scientific articles, demanded results from the therapists. Her hope was methodical, systematic. She believed that if they followed the correct protocol, if they found the right professionals with the proper certifications, Gabriel would get better. He had to get better. But the months passed and Gabriel remained the same, or worse. He seemed increasingly withdrawn, more inaccessible. The meltdowns increased. So did the frustration. Julianne became more rigid, more controlling. She wouldn't accept suggestions that deviated from what she considered scientific. Any alternative approach was rejected, with technical arguments and disapproving looks. Her mother, Mrs. Eleanor, an elegant lady who lived in an apartment in the Gold Coast, reinforced this stance. Everything had to be certified, validated, proven. No improvisation, no risk. It was on a Tuesday in March that everything changed. Richard woke up to a call from Gabriel's nanny, Sarah, saying she had a high fever and couldn't work. Julianne had a meeting she couldn't postpone at the law firm where she worked. Gabriel's school was on break. There was no one available to stay with the boy. Richard looked at the clock. He had an important inspection at a construction site in Pilsen. He couldn't miss it. For a moment he considered cancelling everything, but then he looked at Gabriel, sitting on the living room floor, spinning the car as always, oblivious to the chaos around him. He took his son to the construction site. The decision was hasty, born of desperation and a lack of alternatives. Richard knew it wasn't ideal. An active construction site was no place for a child, much less a child like Gabriel. But he had no choice. He promised himself it would be quick, that he would keep the boy away from danger, that he would keep an eye on him the whole time. The construction site was in Pilsen, a busy and noisy area. The building under construction was 8 stories high, the structure already complete, in the finishing phase. Richard parked the car and took Gabriel by the hand. The boy resisted, as he always did in new environments, but eventually followed his father with that characteristic passivity. He didn't cry, didn't complain. He just walked, his eyes fixed on the ground. Inside the site, the noise was deafening. Jackhammers, saws, hammering, shouted commands. Richard felt his heart clench. This was a terrible idea. Gabriel covered his ears with his hands and began to rock his body, a clear sign of discomfort. Richard took him to a quieter corner near the entrance gate where the sound was less intense. There were a few plastic chairs, a makeshift table, and a stationary cement mixer. The March sun beat down hard on the sidewalk. Richard took off his cap and put it on Gabriel's head. "Sit here, son. Daddy's going to take care of a few things real quick, and he'll be right back, okay?" Gabriel didn't respond. He sat in the chair and went back to rocking his body. Richard walked away, torn between the urgency of his work and the guilt of leaving the boy alone. He asked the gatekeeper, Mr. Gerald, to keep an eye on him. The old man agreed, a bit awkwardly, not quite sure what to do with the unusual situation. Richard went up to the 5th floor, where he needed to check the plumbing installation. He was there for almost 40 minutes, discussing technical details with the foreman, Mr. Jenkins, and taking notes on pending issues. Meanwhile, downstairs, something extraordinary was happening. Michael Smith was 26 years old and worked as a construction laborer. He was a thin man, with sun-weathered brown skin, calloused hands, and an easy smile. He had arrived at the site that morning in his usual cheerful mood, greeting his colleagues, making jokes, carrying bags of cement as if they weighed nothing. When he passed the gate and saw the boy sitting alone, rocking his body and staring at a distant point, something stirred in him. He recognized that movement. He knew that isolation. Michael stopped. He looked at Mr. Gerald, who shrugged as if to say, "I don't know what to do with this kid here." Then Michael approached slowly, half hesitant, half curious. Gabriel didn't look at him. He continued rocking, his eyes fixed on the stationary cement mixer a few feet away. Michael followed the boy's gaze and understood. It wasn't the mixer itself that held Gabriel's attention. It was the drum, the cylindrical shape, the promise of movement. Michael didn't think much. He acted on instinct. He walked over to the cement mixer and turned on the engine. The deep rumble of the equipment filled the space. The drum began to turn, slow, constant, hypnotic. Gabriel stopped rocking. His body froze, and then, for the first time since he had arrived, he lifted his eyes and looked directly at the moving machine. Michael noticed the change. He felt the tension in the air, that fragile moment when something was about to happen. Then he did something unexpected. He began to imitate the sound of the cement mixer, deep, rhythmic, repetitive. Rum, rum, rum. And not just the sound. He began to spin his own body slowly, matching the rhythm of the drum. It looked ridiculous. It looked absurd. But Gabriel got up from the chair. The boy approached, his steps uncertain, his gaze still fixed on the machine. Michael continued spinning, making the deep, almost guttural sound. And then Gabriel did something no one expected. He started to spin too. Slowly at first, then faster. And he laughed. A short, high-pitched, but real laugh. A laugh that Mr. Gerald had never heard from that quiet boy. A laugh that made Michael stop spinning and just watch, with a mixture of surprise and emotion. When Richard came down from the 5th floor and saw the scene, he couldn't process what was happening. Gabriel was spinning next to the cement mixer, his hands flapping, a smile on his face. Michael was nearby, watching, attentive. Mr. Gerald was leaning against the gate, dumbfounded. "What is going on here?" Richard's voice came out louder than he intended. Gabriel immediately stopped spinning and returned to his usual state, eyes downcast, body tense. Michael took a step back, his cement-dusted hands raised in a defensive gesture. "Sorry, sir, The boy was looking at the mixer and I thought, sorry, I didn't mean to do anything wrong." Richard looked from Michael to Gabriel, from Gabriel to the cement mixer. He didn't understand. But there was something there, something he couldn't name. A strange feeling between relief and fear. Gabriel had smiled. Gabriel had interacted. But with whom? With a worker he didn't even know, on a construction site, without supervision, without protocol, without anything. "It's okay. I was just surprised." "Do you work here?" Michael nodded. Yes, sir, I'm Mr. Jenkins's helper. Been here about 3 months. I'm really sorry if I did something wrong. It's just that the boy was so quiet, and I thought, no, it's okay. It's just that my son, he has some difficulties. It's not common for him to react like this. Richard didn't know what else to say. He took Gabriel by the hand and led him back to the car. The boy resisted. For the first time in a long time, he resisted physically, pulling his arm, trying to get back to the cement mixer. Richard had to carry him. Gabriel started to cry. It wasn't the tantrum cry Richard knew. It was something different, deeper, more desperate. In the car, Gabriel struggled. He hit his head on the seat, screamed, and compulsively imitated the sound of the cement mixer. Richard drove in silence, his heart heavy, not knowing if what had happened was good or bad. When they got home, Julianne was in the living room, working on her laptop. She looked at her husband and knew something was wrong. What happened? Richard told her. He tried to be objective, but his voice faltered, the words coming out jumbled. Julianne listened in silence, her face growing more and more serious. When he finished, she snapped the laptop shut. You left our son with a stranger? On a construction site? Richard, have you lost your mind? It wasn't like that, Julianne. I was nearby. Mr. Gerald was watching. And the guy just interacted with Gabriel. It was spontaneous. Spontaneous? Richard, Gabriel has a serious condition. He needs specialized care, not a construction worker playing at imitating machines. That's dangerous, that's irresponsible. But he smiled, Julianne. He laughed. When was the last time you saw our son laugh? The silence that followed was heavy. Julianne looked away. She had no answer for that. Gabriel really didn't laugh, not for a long time, but to accept that a construction worker, with no training, no certification, nothing, had achieved something that all the therapists couldn't, was unacceptable. It was humiliating. This will not happen again, Richard. We are not going to expose Gabriel to situations like that. He has Dr. Reynolds. He has his speech therapist. He has a whole treatment protocol. He doesn't need improvisation. Richard didn't answer. He knew that arguing at that moment would lead nowhere. But something inside him had changed. He had seen his son react. He had seen a genuine connection happen, however brief, however strange, and he couldn't ignore it. In the following days, Gabriel got worse. He refused to eat. He didn't sleep well. He spent hours imitating the sound of the cement mixer, spinning his body, flapping his hands on surfaces. Julianne attributed it to the stress of being exposed to an inappropriate environment. Richard, on the other hand, began to suspect something else. Gabriel wasn't having a meltdown. Gabriel was missing something. Missing that moment, that interaction. That man who for a few minutes had spoken his language. Gabriel's therapist, Dr. Reynolds, was consulted. She listened to Richard's account attentively, her eyes sharp, her posture professional. When he finished, she took a deep breath. Look, Richard, I understand you're looking for any sign of progress, and it's natural for an intense sensory stimulus, like the sound and movement of a machine, to catch the attention of a child on the spectrum. But that doesn't replace structured therapeutic work. It's important to stick to the protocol. But what if there's something there? What if this guy has some gift, some connection? Dr. Reynolds smiled, but it was a polite, almost condescending smile. Connection is something that's built over time, Richard, with technique, with patience, with science, not with improvisation. Richard left that appointment more confused than before. Was Julianne right? Was Dr. Reynolds right? Or was there something everyone was ignoring, something that didn't fit into the charts and protocols? It was then that he made a decision. He had to find Michael again. He had to understand what had happened that morning. He had to, above all, try again. The following Saturday, he went back to the construction site, alone this time. He looked for Michael and found him on the 3rd floor carrying bags of mortar. The young man was surprised to see Richard there, outside of work hours, without the boy. "Sir, did something happen?" Richard took a deep breath. He needed to choose his words carefully. "I wanted to ask you a question about what happened with my son. How did you know what to do? How did you know that would work?" Michael put down the bag of mortar and wiped his hands on his pants. He looked at Richard with a mixture of apprehension and understanding. Then he told him he had a younger brother, Lucas, 17 years old, also on the spectrum. Their family was simple, from the south side of Chicago, without the resources to pay for specialized therapies. When Lucas was diagnosed as a child, Michael's mother, Mrs. Vera, did what she could. She took the boy to the public health clinic, got some sessions through Medicaid, but soon realized it wouldn't be enough. So she improvised. She used textures, sounds, movements. She observed what caught Lucas's attention and expanded on it. It wasn't science, it was intuition. It was love. Lucas always liked machines, repetitive noises. My mum discovered that when he was upset, if she drummed on the table, imitating the sound of a train, he would calm down. So we developed that. I grew up helping. And when I saw your son looking at the cement mixer like that, I knew what to do. I didn't think much, I just felt it. Richard listened in silence, absorbing every word. There was something there, something that Dr. Reynolds, with all her training, didn't have. There was life experience, there was empathy born of necessity. There was a knowledge that didn't come from books, but from years of caring for someone the world considered invisible. My son has been suffering since that day. He's imitating the noise, spinning, not sleeping well. I think he misses it. He misses that. Or you. Michael looked down, clearly embarrassed. I don't know if I can help, sir. I don't have any training. I don't know if it's right. Your wife won't like it. Richard knew Julianne wouldn't like it. He knew he would face resistance, judgment, maybe even fights. But looking at Michael, seeing the sincerity in those tired eyes, he felt he had to try. He had to at least give it a chance, for Gabriel, for himself, for all of them. Can you give me your phone number? I'd like to talk more. I'd like to try again, in a better place, a quieter place. If you're willing, of course. Michael hesitated, but then he took a piece of paper and wrote down the number. He handed it to Richard with a shy smile. I'm willing, for your boy, and for my brother too. If it works, maybe it can help others. Who knows? Maybe we'll discover something, right? Richard put the paper in his pocket as if it were a secret or a promise. He walked down the stairs of the construction site with a heart lighter than when he had gone up. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know if he could convince Julianne. He didn't know if he was being sensible or desperate. But for the first time in a long time, he felt there was a possibility, a sliver of light in the darkness that had settled over his life since Gabriel's diagnosis. When he got home, he found Julianne in the kitchen preparing dinner. Gabriel was in the living room, spinning in the same spot, making guttural sounds. The scene was desolate. It was the perfect portrait of their collective exhaustion. Richard leaned against the doorframe and watched his wife. Her slumped shoulders, her hair tied back haphazardly, the deep, dark circles under her eyes. Julianne was at her limit too. Julianne, we need to talk. She didn't look at him. She continued chopping vegetables, the knife hitting the cutting board rhythmically. If this is about that guy from the construction site, I don't even want to hear it. Richard, it's about our son. It's about us. We're drowning, Julianne. And when a rope appears, we can't just ignore it because it's not the way we expected. Julianne stopped chopping. Her hands were trembling. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of making a mistake. Fear of making things worse. Fear of losing control of a situation that was already so out of control. What if it goes wrong? What if it hurts Gabriel? And what if it goes right, Julianne? What if we have a real chance to reach our son and we let it pass by? Because of prejudice? The word prejudice echoed in the kitchen. Julianne closed her eyes. She knew Richard was right. Part of her resistance wasn't just caution. It was judgment. It was looking at Michael's profession, his lack of diplomas, and thinking it was insufficient. It was thinking that only what came from above, from the academic world, from the certified universe, had value. I need to think, Richard. I need to talk to Dr. Reynolds. You need to trust me just this once for Gabriel. Julianne opened her eyes and finally looked at her husband. She saw not just determination, but desperation. The same desperation she felt, but had learned to camouflage with spreadsheets and protocols. And in that moment, she allowed herself to consider the impossible. She allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, the solution would come from where she least expected it. Okay, but it has to be supervised, and in a proper place. No construction sites, no danger. Richard nodded. He felt relief wash over his body like a wave. It was a start. It was a chance. It was all they needed. Richard and Julianne's condo was in Lincoln Park, a quiet neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. It was a beautiful tree-lined area with quality shops and upper-middle-class neighbors. The building had a 24-hour doorman, a gym, a pool, and a party room. It was the kind of place where everything seemed under control, where people greeted each other with polite smiles and superficial conversations about traffic and the weather. It was to this environment that Michael arrived on a Saturday afternoon. 2 weeks after that conversation at the construction site, Richard had arranged everything carefully. He had asked the building manager for permission for an external visitor, vaguely explaining that he was a professional who would help with his son's treatment. He didn't lie, but he didn't elaborate either. He knew the less information, the less judgment. Michael got off the bus at the corner and walked to the building. He wore clean jeans and a white button-down shirt that was clearly not part of his daily wardrobe. His hands, always calloused from work, were carefully washed, but still bore the marks of cement and mortar. He felt out of place. He looked at the tall building, the uniformed doorman, the imported cars in the garage. He almost gave up, almost took out his phone and made an excuse. But then he thought of Lucas, of the brother he had at home, and remembered why he was there. The doorman, Mr. Benedict, a black man in his 60s, received him with professional courtesy. "Which apartment?" Michael told him. Mr. Benedict picked up the phone, announced the visitor, and after confirmation, buzzed him in. While waiting for the elevator, Michael noticed the stairs. The blonde woman with the baby stroller who slightly altered her path. The young man in a sweatshirt who watched him from the gym through the glass. Nothing aggressive, just that silent assessment, that automatic recognition that he didn't belong there. Richard opened the apartment door with a smile. He was trying to seem calm, but Michael noticed the tension in the engineer's shoulders. Julianne was in the living room, standing, her arms crossed. She wore a casual but elegant dress, and her hair was tied in a perfect bun. She was beautiful, Michael noted, but there was a hardness in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. "Good afternoon, I'm Michael." Julianne nodded formally. "Good afternoon, I'm Julianne, Gabriel's mother. My husband told me about the incident at the construction site." She didn't extend her hand. It wasn't open hostility, but it wasn't a welcome either. Richard quickly intervened, trying to ease the tension. "Come on in, Michael. Gabriel's in his room. He's calmer today. He took his medication earlier." Medication. Michael swallowed hard. Lucas took medication too, but their family couldn't afford the newest ones. They used what Medicaid provided when it was provided. Sometimes they went weeks without, and still they carried on. Gabriel was sitting on the floor of his room surrounded by educational toys carefully organized in clear plastic boxes. He wasn't playing with any of them. He was just rocking his body and staring at the white wall. When Michael entered, the boy didn't react. He continued rocking, oblivious. Michael sat on the floor at a safe distance. He didn't speak. He didn't try to touch him. He just sat there observing. Richard and Julianne remained at the door, tense, as if expecting a miracle or a catastrophe. 5 minutes passed. 10. Gabriel continued to rock. Michael continued to observe. Then, slowly, Michael started tapping his hands on the floor. A soft, repetitive rhythm. Dum, 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 dum. Gabriel stopped rocking. He didn't look at Michael, but he stopped. It was a start. Michael changed the rhythm. Dum-dum, pause, dum-dum. Gabriel tilted his head, as if listening to something far away. Michael picked up one of the toys, a cube with different textures. He ran his hand over the rough surface, making a scraping sound. Gabriel turned his face just a little, enough for Michael to know he had his attention. Then Michael began to hum. It wasn't a real song. It was just a rhythmic, deep sound, similar to the cement mixer but softer, more human. Gabriel stood up. He walked over to Michael. He took the cube from his hand and threw it on the floor. Michael picked it up and threw it too, imitating the sound the cube made when it hit. Gabriel picked it up again and threw it. Michael imitated the sound. And then, for the second time, Gabriel smiled. Julianne brought a hand to her mouth. Richard felt his eyes well up. It was real. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't luck. There was something there, a language that Michael commanded and that others couldn't decipher. For an hour, Michael and Gabriel interacted. Small gestures, repetitive sounds, explored textures. By the end, Gabriel was sitting on Michael's lap, something he rarely did with his own father. Julianne watched everything with an expression that was hard to read. There was astonishment, relief, but also something deeper, a discomfort she didn't want to admit. When Michael got up to leave, Gabriel reacted. He started to cry, to pull on the young man's shirt, to make desperate sounds. Richard had to hold his son while Michael said a quick goodbye, clearly disturbed by the child's reaction. At the door before leaving, Richard grabbed his arm. "Can you come back next week?" Michael looked at Julianne, seeking approval. She hesitated but eventually nodded. "You can, but I'll be present, always." It was a condition. It was a warning. Michael understood and accepted. He rode the elevator down with a heavy heart. Gabriel had connected with him in a way he didn't connect with anyone else, and that was both beautiful and terrifying. It was a responsibility he wasn't sure he could carry. Michael's visits became weekly. Always on Saturdays, always supervised by Julianne, always with Richard nearby. Gabriel began to show subtle changes. He started sleeping better. The meltdowns decreased. He began to imitate more sounds, to explore more textures. Dr. Reynolds, informed of the visits, maintained a cautious but not prohibitive stance. She recognized that something was working, although she couldn't explain exactly what. But if Gabriel's progress was evident, the social tension around them grew. Mrs. Eleanor, Julianne's mother, was the first to express concern. She visited her daughter one afternoon and, upon learning that Michael was in the room with Gabriel, didn't hide her disapproval. "Julianne, are you sure about what you're doing? Leaving a stranger, a manual laborer, alone with your son?" "He's not alone, Mom. Richard is here and Gabriel is getting better." "Getting better? Or just getting attached to someone unsuitable? Have you thought about the consequences of this? What people will think?" "What people, Mom?" Mrs. Eleanor gestured vaguely, as if the answer were obvious. "People, your neighbors, your colleagues at work, my family. This isn't normal, Julianne. You're educated, you have resources, you can afford the best professionals. Why resort to this?" Julianne felt anger rise, but with the anger came doubt. Was her mother right? Was she making a mistake? Was her prejudice against Michael justified after all? The following week in the condo building, the comments began. The neighbor from the apartment next door, Mrs. Marcia, a middle-aged woman who loved to gossip, stopped Julianne in the elevator. "Is everything okay with Gabriel, dear? I've seen a different young man visiting you. A new therapist?" It was a loaded question. Julianne understood the insinuation. A different young man. Different from what? From whom? "He's someone who's helping with my son's treatment, yes." "Oh, that's good. It's just that, we always worry, building security, things like that. You know how it is, right?" Julianne knew. She knew exactly how it was. She knew that if Michael were white, middle class with a college degree, this conversation wouldn't be happening. But she said nothing. She just forced a smile and got off the elevator when the doors opened. Richard also faced resistance at work. During a lunch with Mr. Jenkins, the foreman, the subject came up. "Mr. Moore, Michael's been different. Ever since he started visiting your boy, he's been more distant. Sometimes he shows up late. I don't know if it's good to mix things, He's been showing up late. A few minutes, nothing major. But he's changed, and the other guys are talking. They think it's strange, a construction laborer becoming friends with an engineer. You know how it is, right?" Richard knew, and he didn't like it. But he wasn't going to back down. Not now that Gabriel was getting better. One night after Michael had left, Julianne and Richard had a difficult conversation. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and he appeared with a worried expression. "We need to talk about Michael." Julianne felt her stomach tighten. "What is it?" "I found out some things about him, about his family." Julianne put down the spoon. "What things?" Richard told her. Michael lived with his mother and brother in a simple house in Englewood, on the south side. His father had left when Michael was a child. Mrs. Vera worked as a house cleaner. She earned little but had always prioritized Lucas's health. Michael started working at 15 to help out. He never finished high school. He got his GED years later, between jobs. He had no formal training, but he had experience, and he had love. Julianne listened to it all in silence. When Richard finished, she sat down at the table exhausted. "Does this change anything for you?" "Change what?" "The fact that he doesn't have a formal education, the fact that he's poor, that he lives in a rough neighborhood." Richard took a deep breath. "No, it doesn't. Does it change anything for you?" Julianne didn't answer immediately. She wanted to say no, that she was a fair person, that she didn't judge by appearances, but it would be a lie. It did change things. Maybe it shouldn't, but it did. She had been raised in a world where credentials mattered, where success was measured by diplomas and zip codes. Letting go of that required more than goodwill. It required a transformation she didn't know if she was capable of making. "I don't know, Richard. I don't know if I can fully trust him. I don't know if this is wise. And I don't know if I want our son to get attached to someone who could disappear from his life at any moment." Richard understood her concern. It was legitimate. Michael had no formal commitment to them. He could stop coming at any time. He could move, get another job, have other problems, and Gabriel, who already had so many difficulties, didn't deserve another loss. "I'll talk to him. I'll propose something more structured. Maybe we can help in some way. Financially, I don't know. To ensure he can keep coming without having to give up other things." Julianne looked at her husband with a mixture of gratitude and irritation. It was always like this. Richard trying to solve everything, as if life were an engineering problem that could be calculated and planned. But this time, she didn't argue, because deep down she also wanted it to work out. She wanted Gabriel to keep getting better, even if it meant accepting things that made her deeply uncomfortable. The following Saturday, Richard called Michael for a private conversation. They went out to the condo's balcony, away from Gabriel and Julianne. Richard got straight to the point. "Michael, I know you have your responsibilities, work, family. I don't want these visits to become a burden for you, so I thought I'd make a proposal. We could pay you for your visits, like it was therapy. You'd come twice a week at agreed times and you'd get paid for it." Michael was silent. He looked at his own hands, then at Richard. It wasn't an insult, but there was something about it that bothered him. "I don't want to be paid, sir. I don't want this to become a job. I come here because I like Gabriel, because I know what my brother goes through, because I want to help. If it becomes a business, it loses its meaning." Richard hadn't expected that answer. He was taken aback. "But Michael, you need the money, and it would be fair. You're investing time, energy." "I know, but it's not about money, it's about connection. If I accept payment, Julianne will think, I'm just another professional. And I'm not. I'm someone who understands Gabriel in a different way, and I want that to be respected, not bought." Richard understood, and for the first time he felt a deep respect for this man who, despite not having a diploma, had a wisdom that many doctors did not possess. "But let me make a counter-proposal. I'd like to learn more. I'd like to study. My brother needs me, but I want to be able to help more people too. Kids like Gabriel. Do you think there's a way?" Richard smiled. "There is. Of course, there is. I'll help you with that. We can look for courses, scholarships, I don't know. We'll find a way." And so, a few weeks later, Michael started studying. He enrolled in a technical course in special education offered by an NGO on the south side. The classes were at night after work. It was exhausting, but he did it with determination. Richard paid for the textbooks and offered help whenever needed. Julianne watched everything with mixed feelings. She saw Michael's effort and couldn't deny it was admirable. But she remained uncomfortable with the growing intimacy between him and Gabriel. The boy not only improved with the visits, but he started calling for him. Not with words yet, but with specific sounds he only made when Michael arrived. It was a bond that bothered her deeply. Not because it was bad for Gabriel, but because it highlighted how distant she herself was from her son. One afternoon, while Michael was playing with Gabriel in the bedroom, Julianne found herself crying in the kitchen. Richard found her like that and hugged her. "What's wrong, honey?" She took a while to answer. When she did, her voice was choked. "I should be happy. Gabriel is getting better. But all I can feel is that I'm failing. I'm his mother and I can't do what a stranger can. What's wrong with me?" Richard tightened his embrace. "There's nothing wrong with you, Julianne. You're an amazing mother. Sometimes we need help, and that's okay. But it shouldn't be like this. I read all the books, took all the courses, hired the best therapists, and the one who makes a difference is a guy who barely finished high school. How do I accept that? By accepting that everyone has their gift. Michael has this gift with Gabriel, not because you're insufficient, but because he has an experience you don't, and that's okay." Julianne knew Richard was right, but accepting it meant giving up control, giving up the idea that she could shape her son's treatment according to her expectations. It meant surrendering to the improbable, the unexpected, the uncontrollable. And that terrified her. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Michael was teaching Gabriel to recognize emotions through exaggerated facial expressions. He made funny faces, imitated animal sounds, used improvised puppets. Gabriel laughed, imitated, interacted. They were small steps, but they were steps, and each one was a victory that no one had achieved until then. When Michael said goodbye that afternoon, Gabriel did something unprecedented. He held his hand and said something that sounded like Ma. It wasn't Daddy, it wasn't Mommy. It was something of his own, something that belonged only to that relationship. Michael felt his eyes burn. He looked at Richard and Julianne, seeking permission to be emotional. Richard nodded. Julianne looked away. The following week, Dr. Reynolds asked to speak with Richard and Julianne. The meeting was tense. The therapist had heard about Michael's visits and wanted to better understand what was happening. She listened to their account attentively and at the end sighed. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. What's happening is unusual, but it's not wrong. Michael is using sensory techniques that are scientifically validated. The difference is that he learned them in practice, not in theory. And that has value. Maybe we can formalize this partnership. I can supervise, guide, ensure everything is being done safely, but I'm not going to ask you to stop something that is clearly working." Julianne felt immense relief. Dr. Reynolds' validation was what she needed to silence the voices around her. If the therapist approved, then it was okay. It wasn't crazy, it wasn't irresponsible. It was a different approach, but a legitimate one. "So you think we should continue?" "I do, but with supervision, and with clear boundaries. Michael doesn't replace formal therapy. He complements it, and it's important to make that clear to everyone involved." A schedule was established. Michael would come 3 times a week. Dr. Reynolds would meet with him monthly to discuss strategies and ensure everything was aligned. It was a solution that pleased everyone, except perhaps Mrs. Eleanor, who continued to think the whole thing was absurd. The months passed, and the routine was established. Michael became a constant presence in Gabriel's life and, consequently, in the life of the whole family. 3 times a week, always on time, he would come up to the Lincoln Park condo with his worn-out backpack full of improvised materials. He brought bottle caps, pieces of sandpaper, rolls of twine, objects that to anyone else would be trash, but in his hands became tools of connection. Gabriel progressed. He started sleeping through the night. The meltdowns drastically decreased. He began to imitate sounds more frequently and, at times, even seemed to try to form words. Julianne still maintained a certain emotional distance from Michael, but she no longer questioned his presence. Richard, on the other hand, had developed a genuine friendship with the young man. They talked about baseball, about work, about life. Michael told stories about Lucas, about the neighborhood where he grew up, about the challenges of caring for his brother without resources. Richard listened and learned. He learned that privilege wasn't just having money, but also having the option to ignore certain pains. At his technical course, Michael shone. The teachers praised his dedication and especially his ability to connect theory and practice. He didn't just read about sensory integration, he lived it every day. His contributions in class were always enriched by real examples, stories of Lucas, experiences with Gabriel. His classmates respected him. Some even asked for advice about cases in their own families. Richard had received a promotion offer. He would be a regional manager with a significant salary increase, but it would require constant travel, sometimes for weeks away from Chicago. Before Gabriel, he would have accepted without a second thought. Now he hesitated. He talked to Julianne about it one night, after their son was asleep. "I don't know if it's the right time, Julianne. Gabriel is at a delicate stage. I don't want to miss this." Julianne looked at her husband in surprise. "You're considering turning it down?" "I am. We can always make more money later. But Gabriel, he's growing up now. I don't want to look back in a few years and regret choosing my career." It was a profound change. The man who had thrown himself into work to escape the problem was now willing to sacrifice his career to be present. Julianne felt proud and scared, because if Richard turned it down, they would be tighter financially. They would have to make choices. But looking at her husband, seeing the determination in his eyes, she knew it was the right decision. "Turn it down. We'll manage." Richard turned down the promotion. His boss didn't understand. His colleagues commented that he was missing a unique opportunity. But he didn't care. For the first time in his adult life, he was choosing something other than professional success. It was on a Tuesday night that everything changed again. Richard was at the office when his cell phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was trembling, broken. "Mr. Moore, my mum. She had a stroke. She's at the hospital. It's bad." Richard felt the floor drop out from under him. He asked for the hospital's name, said he was on his way, hung up and ran out. He barely told Julianne, just sent a quick text. He got in his car and sped across Chicago until he reached Southside Community Hospital. He found Michael in the hallway, sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. Lucas was next to him, rocking his body, making repetitive sounds. It was the first time Richard had seen Michael's brother in person. The boy was 17 but looked younger, thin, with disheveled hair and a distant gaze. He wore a Chicago Bulls t-shirt and worn-out sweatpants. Michael stood up when he saw Richard. "Sir, thank you for coming. I didn't know who to call. I don't have anyone." Richard hugged the young man. He felt his body tremble, trying to hold back tears. "Tell me what happened," Michael told him. Mrs. Vera had come home from work complaining of a headache. She had lain down to rest, and minutes later, Michael found her unconscious. He called an ambulance. They rushed her to the hospital. The doctors said it was a severe ischemic stroke. She was under observation. They didn't know if she would survive, and if she did, she would likely have permanent damage. Richard stayed there with Michael all night. Lucas, agitated by the change in environment and his mother's absence, had a meltdown. He started banging his head against the wall, screaming. Michael tried to calm him down, but he was in a panic. It was Richard who acted. He remembered the techniques he had seen Michael use with Gabriel. He started clapping his hands in a steady rhythm, speaking in a low, repetitive tone. Lucas stopped banging his head and started following the rhythm. Gradually, he calmed down. "You learn fast, sir." "I had a good teacher." In the morning, Mrs. Vera was stable but unconscious. The doctors said it would be a long recovery. Michael would have to make difficult choices. He couldn't miss work. He couldn't stop studying. But he also couldn't leave Lucas alone. The boy needed constant supervision. He couldn't stay home alone. He would panic, do dangerous things. Richard made a decision without consulting Julianne. He knew she might not agree, but there was no time for debate. "Lucas is going to stay at our house until things get sorted out." Michael's eyes widened. "Sir, I can't ask that of you. It's too much responsibility. Julianne doesn't even know Lucas. It's not fair to you. You're not asking, I'm offering. And it's not about being fair. It's about doing what's right. Lucas needs a safe place. We have space. We have the means." And Gabriel can benefit from the company. It'll be good for everyone. Michael cried, not from sadness, but from relief, from gratitude, from a mixture of emotions that couldn't be put into words. Richard called Julianne, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration. Lucas was coming to live with them temporarily. Julianne, still in bed, listened in silence. She could have fought. She could have refused. But there was something in Richard's voice, an urgency, a necessity, that made her give in. Okay, but we need to talk about this properly when you get home. They arrived home late that morning. Lucas entered the condo with hesitant steps, his eyes fixed on the floor. Gabriel was in the living room playing with blocks. When he saw Lucas, he stopped. The two looked at each other. It wasn't love at first sight. It was recognition, like two animals of the same species meeting in a strange territory. Lucas approached slowly and sat down next to Gabriel. He picked up a block and tapped it on the floor. Gabriel picked up another and imitated him. Lucas smiled. Gabriel did too. Julianne watched everything from the kitchen, her arms crossed, her heart tight. This wasn't in the plan. None of it was. But watching the two boys interact, without words, without protocol, just existing next to each other, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it wasn't about control. Maybe it was about surrendering to the flow of life, even when it didn't make sense. The first few days were difficult. Lucas had very specific routines. He always woke up at the same time, only ate certain foods, and had meltdowns if anything changed. Julianne had to learn to deal with it. Dr. Reynolds was consulted and gave guidance. Michael spent every evening at the condo after work, helping with the adjustment. He slept on the couch and left at dawn for the hospital before heading to the construction site. But something extraordinary began to happen. Gabriel and Lucas developed their own language. They imitated each other's sounds, drummed together, spun in sync. Gabriel, who had always been more withdrawn, started to imitate Lucas's movements, and Lucas, who rarely interacted with other people, seemed relaxed around Gabriel. It was a strange but functional symbiosis. In 2 weeks, Gabriel made progress that had previously taken months. He started making more complex sounds, tried to hold a fork by himself, and looked his mother in the eyes for the first time in years. Julianne cried when it happened. She cried because she realized her son wasn't lost. He was just waiting for someone who spoke his language to show him the way back. Mrs. Vera improved slowly. She regained consciousness but was left with lasting effects. Half of her body was paralyzed, her speech impaired. She would need months of physical therapy. Michael visited her every day, but he knew she wouldn't be able to care for Lucas anytime soon. Maybe never again in the way she used to. It was Julianne who made the suggestion. They were all in the living room after Gabriel and Lucas had fallen asleep when she spoke. What if we formalize this? Lucas's stay here. Make sure he has access to school, medical care, everything he needs. Richard looked at his wife in surprise. Are you suggesting a shared guardianship, or something like it? I don't know how it works legally, but there must be a way. Michael remains responsible, but we help formally. That way he doesn't have to choose between taking care of his brother and working. Michael was speechless. He looked from Julianne to Richard, unable to process it. You would do that. Why? Julianne took a deep breath. Because Lucas is good for Gabriel, because you are good for Gabriel, and because in the end, family isn't just blood. It's who stays, it's who cares, it's who shows up. It was the first time Julianne had verbalized it, the first time she admitted that Michael and Lucas had become an irreversible part of their lives. They were no longer the worker and his brother. They were people who mattered, people who made a difference. They sought out a lawyer. Dr. Evans, an acquaintance of Richard's, specialized in family law. He listened to the case and grimaced. It's complicated. Shared guardianship is normally between parents. In your case, Michael has de facto guardianship of Lucas since the mother is incapacitated. Transferring part of that responsibility to you will require a legal process, and there will be resistance. What kind of resistance? Dr. Evans hesitated. He looked at Michael, then at Richard and Julianne. Resistance from those who will question why an upper-middle-class family wants to take on the guardianship of a teenager from the inner city. They'll suspect your motives. They'll question if it's exploitation, if there's a financial interest. And they will certainly question Michael's ability to exercise primary guardianship, given his socio-economic profile. Michael looked down. He knew this would come. He knew he would be judged, not for a lack of love, but for a lack of money, for a lack of a proper last name, for a lack of the codes that society valued more than character. "We'll face it," Richard said. "If we have to, we'll face it." They filed the petition for co-guardianship. Dr. Evans prepared all the documentation, including reports from Dr. Reynolds, attesting to the benefits of the relationship between Gabriel and Lucas, statements from Michael and letters from his neighbors and colleagues. It was a solid case, but Dr. Evans warned that the prosecutor in charge, Franklin Miller, was known for being strict and, in his words, traditionalist. The first hearing was scheduled for a month later. During that time, life in the condo intensified. Lucas was no longer a guest. He had his own room, his own clothes, his own established routine. Julianne enrolled him in a nearby special needs school. He and Gabriel went together. The teachers were impressed with their interaction. They reported that Gabriel was more communicative, more present. Mrs. Eleanor, however, did not hide her disapproval. She visited her daughter and was blunt. "This is wrong, Julianne. You're playing savior and you're not seeing the consequences. What will your friends think? What will my family think? You're putting your son in contact with a reality that isn't his. Mum, Gabriel is better than ever, and Lucas is a wonderful boy. There's nothing wrong with this." "Yes, there is. Everything is wrong with it. You're letting yourself be carried away by pity, and pity isn't love. In a few months you'll get tired, and then what? Are you going to send the boy back? Have you thought about what that will do to him?" Julianne felt anger rise, but with it came guilt, because, deep down, she had thought about it. She had thought about how long this would be sustainable. She had thought about what it would be like if one day she had to say no. But looking at the two boys, seeing how happy they were together, she decided she would face that day when it came. For now, she was going to do what was right, not out of pity, but out of love. A love she was learning to build in the rubble of her collapsed certainties. In the condo building, the stares multiplied. Mrs. Marcia no longer disguised her curiosity. She would stop Julianne in the elevator, at the gym, at the front desk, always with questions loaded with judgment. The building manager even suggested that Lucas's prolonged stay violated some visitation rule. Richard countered with the guardianship process documents. The manager backed down, but the discomfort remained. One afternoon, while Lucas and Gabriel were playing in the building's playground, a group of mothers approached Julianne. The conversation was polite, but the message was clear. They were concerned. Concerned for their children's safety. Concerned about the influence. Concerned about the example. Julianne listened to it all and took a deep breath. Then, in a firm voice, she replied, "My son is autistic. He spent 5 years practically mute. Today he talks. Today he interacts. And you know why? Because of that boy over there. Because of Michael's brother. So, with all due respect, if you're worried about safety, I suggest you worry about the prejudices you're teaching your own children, because that is what's truly dangerous." With that, she took Gabriel and Lucas by the hand and went up to the apartment. She was trembling, but she was certain. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was on the right side of the story. Michael finished his technical course the following week. The graduation would be simple on a Saturday afternoon in the NGO's hall. He invited Richard and Julianne. They both went. They brought Gabriel and Lucas. Mrs. Vera, still in a wheelchair, was also there. She cried when she saw her son receive his certificate. She cried when Richard stood up and gave a standing ovation. She cried when Julianne approached her, and for the first time they truly talked. Michael dedicated the diploma to her and to Lucas, but he looked at Richard and Julianne when he said the last words of his speech. "And it's also dedicated to those who showed me that family is who believes in you when no one else does." The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. They all knew it would be difficult. But now, for the first time, they felt they were fighting together. Not just for Lucas, but for a bigger idea, for the possibility of a world where love was worth more than appearances, where compassion was worth more than prejudice, where, in the end, what mattered was both simple and profound. It was looking at a child, any child, and deciding, I will stay, I will care, I will love. The Cook County Circuit Court was a grey, imposing building that inspired more intimidation than welcome. Richard parked the car and looked at Julianne in the passenger seat. She wore a sober suit, her hair tied back, light makeup. She looked like a lawyer going to court, and in a way that's exactly what she was doing, defending a cause, defending a family she didn't even know she had until a few months ago. Michael was already there, waiting at the door. He wore grey slacks and a starched white shirt. They were clearly not his everyday clothes. Richard recognized the shirt. It was one he had given him as a gift weeks ago. Michael had accepted it with gratitude, but also with embarrassment. He didn't like taking charity, but he understood this was an important moment. It was no time for pride. Dr. Evans, the lawyer, arrived minutes later. He carried a worn leather briefcase and wore a serious expression. They spoke briefly in the hallway before going in. He reviewed what they should expect. The prosecutor would ask questions. He would question their motives. He would try to identify inconsistencies. It was his job. It wasn't personal, but it would feel like it. Michael, the focus will be on you. They'll question your ability to provide for Lucas, your financial stability, your education. Don't get defensive. Be honest. Show that you know your limitations, but also your strengths. And us? Julianne asked. You'll be questioned about your motives. Why? You want this. If there's a financial interest, if it's not a disguised adoption attempt, be direct. Talk about the relationship between the boys. Talk about what you've seen. Facts, not emotions. But it is about emotions, Richard said. In the end, all of this is about emotions. Dr. Evans smiled, but it was a sad smile. I know, but the system doesn't run on emotions. It runs on facts. So let's give them the facts and hope they see the emotions behind them. They entered the hearing room. It was small with beige walls and a long table in the center. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but the prosecutor was already there. Franklin Miller was a man in his 50s, with graying hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and an austere expression. He greeted Dr. Evans with professional familiarity, but looked at Richard, Julianne, and Michael with evident skepticism. They sat down. The silence was heavy. Julianne held Richard's hand under the table. Michael kept his eyes fixed on his own hands, breathing deeply, trying to control his nerves. The door opened and the judge entered. Judge Paul H. Anderson was a middle-aged black man with an upright posture and an attentive gaze. Everyone stood. He gestured for them to sit and opened the file before him. He read the documents in silence for a few minutes. Then he looked up. Well, this is an unusual case. I'll be frank. It's not common to see co-guardianship petitions under these circumstances. Generally, when a minor needs support, the state steps in or formal adoption is pursued. What you are proposing is unconventional. Dr. Evans spoke up. Your Honor, we understand it's unusual, but the circumstances are unusual as well. Mr. Michael Smith has the full capacity and desire to maintain primary guardianship of his brother. What Mr. and Mrs. Moore are proposing is a formal support system to ensure the teenager has access to resources that Mr. Smith, on his own, would struggle to provide. But the emotional responsibility, the primary reference, remains his brother. The prosecutor interjected. With all due respect, Your Honor, that is precisely my concern. We are talking about a 26-year-old man, a construction laborer, with an unstable income, no higher education, living in precarious conditions. How can he be considered fit to maintain primary guardianship of a teenager with special needs? Furthermore, what is the Moores' real interest in this? Why take responsibility for a child with whom they have no blood relation? Michael opened his mouth to respond, but Dr. Evans placed a hand on his arm, signaling for calm. The lawyer answered, Mr. Prosecutor, Mr. Smith does have training. He recently completed a technical course in special education and has years of experience caring for his brother. As for his income, it's true it's not high, but it is stable, and his living conditions are being addressed. As for the Moores, their motivation is clear and documented. Their son Gabriel is also on the autism spectrum. His interaction with Lucas has been fundamental to his development. This isn't charity. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. The prosecutor didn't seem convinced. Your Honor, with all due respect, this sounds like an attempt to use a vulnerable teenager as a therapeutic tool for another child. That is not ethical. Julianne's blood boiled. She couldn't hold back. Excuse me, but that's not true. Lucas is not a tool for anything. He is a boy who needs a stable home and who by luck found one with us. And yes, my son benefits from his presence. But Lucas also benefits from ours. He has access to school, therapies, proper nutrition, everything he needs. We are not exploiting anyone, we are caring. The judge looked at Julianne with interest. Mrs. Moore, can you elaborate? Can you tell me, in your own words, how this began? Julianne took a deep breath. She told him everything, from the day Richard took Gabriel to the construction site, from the first meeting with Michael, from her own initial resistance. She omitted nothing. She spoke of the prejudice, the doubts, the fears, and she spoke of the transformation, both Gabriel's and her own. I didn't want to accept it. I thought it was crazy. A construction worker with no diploma, no certification, interacting with my son, but I was wrong. I was wrong because I thought only what came from above, from the academic world, had value. And Michael showed me that love and knowledge are not mutually exclusive. He has both. And Lucas is the brother Gabriel never had. They understand each other in a way I never will. And that's okay. Because my role isn't to understand. It's to ensure they have what they need to grow together. The judge listened in silence. His fingers interlaced on the table. Then he turned to Michael. Mr. Smith, do you have anything to say? Michael swallowed hard. His voice was quiet but firm. I know I'm not ideal. I know I don't have money. I don't own a house. I don't have a college degree. But I have one thing that a lot of people with all that don't have. I know what it's like to care for someone the world gives up on. I grew up watching my mom work miracles to keep my brother alive and happy when the system offered nothing. I learned in practice what others learn in books. And I'm not saying that's better, but I'm saying it has value. And Lucas, he doesn't need money. He needs someone who understands him, who isn't afraid of him, who doesn't give up on him. I'm that person. And if I can do that with the help of good people like Richard and Julianne, why shouldn't I? The prosecutor sighed. Your Honor, the speech is nice. But we're talking about legislation, civil responsibility, formal guarantees. We can't base judicial decisions on feelings. Dr. Evans intervened again. Mr. Prosecutor, the law exists to protect the best interests of the child. And Lucas's best interest is to have a family, to have stability, to have love. All of that is being offered. The fact that it comes in a non-traditional configuration doesn't invalidate it. The judge raised his hand, signaling for silence. I would like to speak with Lucas. Is he here? Dr. Evans hesitated. Your Honor, Lucas has communication difficulties. He is on the spectrum. I'm not sure he'll be able to answer questions in a conventional way. I'm not asking to interrogate him. I just want to see him, and I would also like to see Gabriel, the two of them together. I want to understand this dynamic you're all describing. Richard and Julianne had left Gabriel and Lucas in the waiting room with a social worker. They went to get them. When they entered the hearing room, the contrast was stark. Gabriel with his designer clothes, imported sneakers and superhero backpack. Lucas with simple but clean clothes, worn-out sneakers, and an old baseball cap. But their gaze was the same. That look that recognized in the other something the rest of the world couldn't see. The two sat next to Michael. Lucas immediately took his brother's hand. Gabriel stood next to Richard but kept looking at Lucas. The judge watched in silence. Then he addressed Lucas in a soft voice. Lucas, my name is Paul. I work in this building. Do you know why you're here today? Lucas didn't answer. He kept looking at the floor, rocking his body slightly. The prosecutor made an "I told you so" expression. But then Gabriel moved. He left his father's side and walked over to Lucas. He sat on the floor next to him and began to clap his hands in a specific rhythm. Lucas stopped rocking and began to clap too in the same rhythm. The two of them stayed there, synchronized, creating a song without melody, a conversation without words. The judge leaned forward, watching intently. Then he looked at Dr. Reynolds, who was present as an expert witness. "Doctor, can you explain what is happening?" Dr. Reynolds stood up. "Your Honor, what you are seeing is non-verbal communication between two children on the spectrum. They have developed their own language based on rhythms, sounds, and movements. This is extremely rare and extremely valuable. Gabriel spent 5 years with almost no communication. Since Lucas entered his life, he has evolved more than in all his years of formal therapy. And Lucas, who has always had difficulty forming bonds, has found a peer in Gabriel, an emotional anchor." The prosecutor was not convinced. "But that doesn't justify a co-guardianship. That justifies supervised visits, controlled interaction." It was then that it happened. Gabriel stopped clapping and stood up. He walked over to Michael and, for the first time in the presence of strangers, did something he had never done before. He climbed into his lap. Michael froze, not knowing what to do. Gabriel settled in, put his head on the young man's shoulder, and in a low but clear voice said one word: "Ma." It wasn't Michael. It wasn't a name. But it was a sound that belonged only to that relationship. Julianne brought a hand to her mouth. Richard felt tears stream down his face. Michael hugged the boy, trying not to break down right there. The judge took off his glasses and ran a hand over his face. He was silent for a long minute. Then he put his glasses back on and looked at the prosecutor. "Mr. Miller, I understand your concerns. They are valid and necessary. But I do not see exploitation here. I see family. And family, as we all know, comes in diverse forms." He turned to Michael, Richard, and Julianne. "I will approve the co-guardianship, but with conditions. Michael retains primary guardianship of Lucas. The Moores assume joint responsibility for matters of health, education, and housing. All parties involved must continue with regular psychosocial follow-up. There will be semi-annual evaluations to ensure the arrangement is working for Lucas's well-being. If at any point there is evidence that it is not, I will revoke the decision. Is that clear?" Everyone agreed. The prosecutor did not look pleased, but there was nothing more to be done. The decision was made. Dr. Evans smiled. Richard and Julianne hugged. Michael remained seated, Gabriel still in his lap, unable to believe it had really happened. Outside the courthouse, the feeling was surreal. Michael thanked them repeatedly, his voice choked with emotion. Richard just hugged him. Julianne kissed Lucas's forehead. It was official. They were a family. Strange, unlikely, but a family. In the following months, the news spread. The story of that unconventional family reached some media outlets. It started small on a blog about inclusion, then an article in a local newspaper, then a major television network asked to do a story. Michael was hesitant, but Richard and Julianne convinced him. If it could help other families, it was worth it. The story aired on a Sunday night. It showed the daily life of the four of them, Gabriel and Lucas playing, Michael teaching sensory techniques, Richard and Julianne talking about their journey, Mrs. Vera, still recovering, giving an interview from her wheelchair, crying with pride for her son. The impact was immediate. Social media exploded. There were negative comments, of course, people accusing the family of a publicity stunt, people saying it was all fake, but the majority of the messages were of support, of gratitude, of identification. Parents of autistic children started reaching out to Michael. They wanted to learn. They wanted to understand how he did it. Michael, with the support of Dr. Reynolds, started giving small workshops on Saturdays. He taught basic sensory integration techniques. He shared Lucas's story. He showed that you didn't need much to make a difference. You needed attention, patience, love. An NGO on the South Side offered him a space to expand his work. Richard helped with the planning, Julianne with the legal side, Dr. Reynolds with technical supervision. In 6 months, they had served over 50 families, all low income, all without access to expensive therapies, all looking for hope. Michael became a reference, not because he had a diploma, but because he had lived experience, because he spoke the language of those who suffer, of those who fight, of those who don't give up. He started getting invited to speak at conferences, at inclusive education events. He always went with Lucas. He always made sure to say he wasn't an expert. He was just a brother who loved. Gabriel at 7 was unrecognizable. He spoke in full sentences. He attended a regular school with an aide. He had friends. He laughed out loud. He hugged. He made eye contact. His teachers said he was one of the most affectionate students in the class. Julianne saved every drawing he made, every little note he wrote. Richard recorded every moment on video, afraid of forgetting the miracle that transformation had been. Lucas was growing too. He still had his peculiarities, of course, he always would, but he was more secure, more integrated. He had routines that worked. He had a family that understood him, and he had a borrowed brother who loved him as much as his own. Mrs. Vera partially recovered. She went back to living on her own, but with daily assistance. Michael visited her every day. Sometimes he brought Lucas. Sometimes he brought Gabriel too. She adored both boys. She said God had given her one son and 2 grandsons as a gift. Mrs. Eleanor, Julianne's mother, took longer to accept it. But when she saw Gabriel singing happy birthday to Lucas at the boys' party, when she saw the genuine smiles on everyone's faces, something inside her gave way. She started bringing gifts for Lucas. She began to treat him as she treated Gabriel. One day, in a conversation with her daughter, she admitted, "I was wrong. I judged, and I almost made you lose this." Julianne hugged her. "We judged too, Mom. The important thing is that we learned." The condo community also changed. Slowly, but it changed. The children stopped being wary of Lucas. Some even started playing with him and Gabriel. Mrs. Marcia, the gossipy neighbor, apologized one day. She said she had prejudices she didn't even know she had, and that seeing their family made her want to be a better person. Richard never regretted turning down the promotion. His career continued, but at a different pace. Less unbridled ambition, more balance. He began to value the little things. Breakfast with his son, movie nights with his wife, Saturdays playing ball with Michael and the boys. Michael bought a simple little house in Englewood with the help of a loan, but he spent so much time at Richard and Julianne's condo that he practically had 2 homes. Lucas split his time between the 2, 1 week at each. It was a complex dance, but it worked. One December evening, 2 years after the hearing, the whole family was gathered at the Lincoln Park condo. Richard, Julianne, Gabriel, Michael, Lucas, and Mrs. Vera. They were eating pizza in the living room, talking about their Christmas plans. Gabriel and Lucas were on the floor, doing a puzzle. Suddenly, Gabriel stopped and looked around. He looked at each person, and then he said, with that clarity only he possessed, "I like my family." It was a simple sentence, banal even, but coming from him, it was everything. It was confirmation that this hadn't been madness. It had been courage, the courage to challenge convention, the courage to love without a manual, the courage to build bridges where everyone else saw chasms. Julianne cried, Richard cried, Michael cried, Mrs. Vera cried, and Lucas, in his own way, clapped his hands in a joyful rhythm, which Gabriel immediately imitated. There, in that Lincoln Park condo, on an ordinary December night, the family that shouldn't have existed was celebrating its existence. And it was beautiful, it was imperfect, it was real. Michael looked at Richard and said, almost in a whisper, "We did it, didn't we, sir?" Richard smiled. "We did. But don't call me sir. Call me Richard. Or brother. Either one works." Michael laughed, and for the first time since it all began, he felt like he belonged. Not because he had changed, but because the world around him had decided to see him differently. It had decided to see past the clothes, the job, the address. It had decided to see the heart. And in the end, that's what it was all about. About seeing, truly seeing, without filters, without prejudice, just seeing the other as human. as an equal, as someone worthy of love, respect, and opportunity. Gabriel and Lucas had taught them all that, without words, without effort, just by being who they were. And in the process, they had saved not only themselves, but everyone around them. The story of that family became a local legend. Other co-guardianship cases began to be filed, inspired by them. Judges cited their case as a precedent. Social workers used it as an example. And slowly, the idea that family was only blood gave way to something bigger. Family was choice. Family was love. Family was who stayed. Years later, Gabriel and Lucas graduated from high school. Gabriel wanted to be a psychologist. Lucas wanted to be a musician. Different dreams, but parallel. Michael, by then, had opened a small support center for families with autistic children. It worked in partnership with the NGO. It provided services for free. Richard and Julianne helped financially and as volunteers. One afternoon, a mother arrived at the center with her young son. The boy didn't speak. He didn't interact. The mother was desperate. Michael listened to her patiently. Then, he told her his story. The story of a construction worker who saw a child spinning alone and decided to spin with him. The mother cried and asked, "So there's hope?" Michael smiled. "Always. There's always hope." End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Richard, Julianne, Gabriel, Michael, and Lucas has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of love, resilience, and transformation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Every day we bring you intense and real stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul, showing that love knows no barriers and that family is much more than blood ties. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life.